Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to share this one with you because we are diving into a piece of history that honestly sounds exactly like the plot of a psychological thriller. We're looking at a deeply chilling event from 1951, set in the idyllic, sun-drenched French village of Pont-Saint-Esprit. It was a mass poisoning so severe and so bizarre that the French press quickly dubbed it le pain maudit, or the cursed bread. Today, we're going to look at the victims, trace this fatal supply chain, and explore the medical and maybe even geopolitical mysteries that still surround this tragedy today. Picture this. It's mid-August. The Second World War has been over for a few years, but rationing and tricky supply chains are still a harsh reality in southern France. The villagers of Pont-Saint-Esprit are just going about their daily routines. But then, on August 16th, this picturesque town is hit by something completely bizarre. Out of nowhere, dozens of people are gripped by terrifying symptoms. It goes from a perfectly normal summer day to just unimaginable madness in a flash. Section 1. The Apocalyptic Night. At first, the local doctors were basically just seeing what looked like a really bad wave of food poisoning. We're talking intense nausea, vomiting, and these debilitating flashes of cold chills and heat waves. But within hours, and certainly within days, it became terrifyingly clear that this was no ordinary stomach bug. The physical symptoms escalated into severe neurological distress. Villagers actually started experiencing violent hallucinatory crises and uncontrollable physical convulsions. It was a rapid, horrifying shift from being physically sick to falling into an intense waking psychosis. And the mass hysteria was just intensely vivid and honestly incredibly dangerous. According to historical records, one man actually threw himself from a second-story window because he firmly believed he was an airplane. Tragically, an 11-year-old boy, completely gripped by these inescapable delusions, tried to strangle his own mother. The town was entirely consumed by madness, and the local authorities were just completely overwhelmed. They had no idea what to do. The sheer scale and terror of the whole thing really peaked just over a week later. On the night of August 24th, the situation deteriorated so drastically that one of the town's doctors grimly called it the Nuit d'Apocalypse, the apocalyptic night. You really have to imagine the absolute panic of these medical professionals. They're watching their entire community literally lose their grip on reality all at once, with zero idea how to stop it and no clue who might be hit next. To put the final toll into perspective for such a small community, it's pretty staggering. Over 250 people were poisoned. The neurological damage was so profound that 50 individuals actually had to be interned in psychiatric asylums. And tragically, 7 people lost their lives. Obviously, with numbers like that, the authorities had to act immediately. Section 2. Tracking the cursed bread. Things moved incredibly fast, leaving basically zero room for error. So, August 16th, the initial symptoms begin. By August 19th, there's a massive epidemiological breakthrough when doctors actually identify bread as the source. The very next day, August 20th, a full-scale alert goes out to police and health services across the whole region. We hit that terrifying apocalyptic night on the 24th, and by the end of the month, August 31st, the very first criminal arrests are made. It's just a frantic 2-week window where urgent public health measures and criminal justice violently collide. So you might be wondering, how exactly did they figure it out? Well, Doctors View and Gabay did some brilliant, classic epidemiological detective work. They looked at families where some members got severely ill, but others were perfectly fine. And they asked, what was the difference? It turned out the sick individuals ate traditional bread. The healthy ones ate biscottis. Furthermore, every single victim had eaten bread purchased from one specific place, Roche-Briand's local bakery. Specifically, the police investigation zeroed right in on his second batch of bread from August 16th. Section 3. The Miller's Crime. Okay, to really understand how this happened, we have to look at the historical context. Post-war France had this government green control board called ONIC. They held a strict monopoly, meaning bakers generally had zero choice over the quality of their flour. They just got what the government sent. Look, in this region was often lower quality export flour. To get around this, locals used a fatal loophole called échangisme. This was an informal, actually illegal, bartering system where a farmer would give a baker cheap, self-grown grain in exchange for bread later on. It completely bypassed all the crucial government safety checks. The exact sequence of events that compromised the town's flour supply is basically a masterclass in compounding errors. Step 1. A local baker named Guy Brouwer accepted cheap, leftover grain from a farmer. Step 2. Bruere brings this grain to a miller named Maurice Mallet. Step 3. To keep the baker's business, Mallet illegally mills this poor grain and mixes it with a larger batch of clean, high-quality export flour. He basically wrongly assumed the good flour would dilute the bad. And finally, step 4. This tainted mixture makes its way to Roquebrion's bakery, gets baked into bread, and is sold to the unsuspecting public. Under hours of intense police interrogation, Maurice Mallet made a pretty devastating confession. He admitted that the grain Bruere brought him was visibly poor quality. It was leftover end-of-season grain that was heavily contaminated with rye, weevils, mites, and just absolute dust. But he processed it anyway, just to avoid losing a client. Because of this fatal negligence, on August 31st, both Mallet and Bruere were arrested for involuntary manslaughter. Section 4. The medical explanations. Now, the primary scientific consensus, which was quickly published in the British Medical Journal by Dr. Gabay and his colleagues, pointed squarely to ergot poisoning. Ergot, or Claviceps purpurea, is a naturally occurring fungus that is notorious for infecting damp rye grain. And remember, the miller specifically confessed to milling grain heavily contaminated with rye. But what's absolutely fascinating here is that this fungus produces alkaloids that are structurally very similar to the hallucinogenic drug LSD. This perfectly explained that intense psychedelic psychoses the villagers were experiencing. Now, while the ergot theory made a ton of sense, it wasn't the only one explored during the civil trials. Later investigations looked into an alternative culprit, mercury poisoning. There was this popular mercury-based agricultural fungicide called Panagen, used to treat seeds at the time. Investigators actually found fluorescent red stains on some empty flour bags, which raised serious suspicions that Panagen had seeped into the flour during transport. While tests did show the active mercury ingredient could penetrate the bags, the broader scientific community mostly remained anchored to the ergot theory, mainly because of those specific hallucinatory symptoms, though the debate did linger for years. Section 5. The CIA LSD theory. Decades after the event, in 2009, investigative journalist Hank P. Albarelli Jr. published a book proposing a startling theory that genuinely feels pulled straight out of an espionage thriller. He claimed the mass poisoning had absolutely nothing to do with ergot or mercury. Instead, relying on documents from the U.S. National Archives, he alleged that the outbreak was actually an intentional, experimental CIA mind control field test, dubbed Project SPAN. He tied this directly into the CIA's MKULTRA biological warfare program. And Albarelli points to some highly intriguing circumstantial evidence to build his case. First off, the Sandoz Chemical Company, which is the very laboratory where Albert Hofmann first synthesized LSD, was located in Basel, Switzerland. That's roughly 100 miles away from the affected village. Second, he cites reports of unmarked, low-flying crop dusters seen in the area on the morning of the outbreak, suggesting some sort of aerosol spray delivery. And finally, he references declassified CIA documents showing that the intelligence agency was secretly communicating with Sandoz personnel during that exact time period. But to truly understand this in our explainer, we have to look at both sides impartially. Historian Stephen Kaplan fiercely challenges the CIA theory using strict clinical logic. When we compare the CIA theory to the clinical reality, a few major cracks appear. First, regarding onset time. LSD hits a person in just a few hours, but the victims in Pont-Saint-Esprit took 36 hours or more to show symptoms. Second, the physical symptoms. LSD simply does not cause the severe digestive and vegetative ailments that these villagers suffered from. And lastly, the delivery method. An aerosol drop dusting spray over the whole village completely conflicts with the undeniable epidemiological fact that the sickness was isolated strictly to people who consumed Rochebrion's specific batch of bread. Which leaves us right here. Was the tragedy of Le Pain Maudit simply the fatal result of a corrupt, unchecked post-war supply chain and a negligent miller, or do the shadows of Cold War experiments and top-secret intelligence programs still obscure the real truth of what happened in that village? It is a remarkable collision of science, history, and mystery that reminds us how fragile our food supply chains, and frankly our grip on reality, can truly be. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this breakdown helped you grasp just how deeply fascinating this case is. Keep questioning the history around you, and we'll see you in the next one.